Welcome to the Baunfire podcast. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Xbox Keystone details, Horizon's Netflix show is shelved. Did not think that was going to be so hard to say. Metal Gear Solid's producer wants Kojima involved, and a little bit more. Kind of a slow couple weeks. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, or subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel and get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the link in the show description. You can also support my show by sharing new episodes on any social media platforms you enjoy, or just share it with a friend. Check out the Baunfire or Bon Diesel on Twitter or on Threads for links you can share. Getting into some gaming news, we'll start with a little pre-show segment, just to update on what's been going on with me. There wasn't an episode last week. I was on vacation. We went to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, here in the States, and had a really great time. Unfortunately, right before we left on this 5-day vacation, we had a family member pass away on my wife's side, who she was pretty close to, and that was, pretty unfortunate. And we kind of weighed on if we should still go or not. We decided to, since the celebration of life and everything wasn't happening until we got back, and that's actually what's coming up here pretty soon after I record this. Then when we got home, 2 days after we got back, a lightning strike during a storm either struck our house or really, really close to it, and knocked out our internet. It didn't knock out our power. We have fiber optic internet, and at least the fiber optic internet service that we get, which I think is pretty normal, you have your router, right? Just like you always do for internet. But for fiber optic, you have a plug on the inside of your house, and some wires running to a box, at least we do on the outside of our house. And that powers the fiber optic connection, basically. And that box, this is the second or third time it's gotten fried by lightning. I assume a power surge. And so that had to get replaced. We were without internet for a couple days. I didn't know if I was going to record this podcast or not, but we got up and running today. So we've had some stuff going on. So I appreciate the patience. I'm really excited to record, even though honestly there wasn't any really big news. The only big thing that happened, I don't really want to talk that much about, of this awful Force in-game streaming got revealed to be a big piece of crap that I assumed everyone could tell he was, but here we are. On another note, before we get going, I've been focusing pretty hard over the last, since the beginning of June, on trying to get down to a healthy weight and to a healthier me. And just an update on that, I was at 282 pounds at the beginning of June, and I am now at 266. So I'm pretty pumped about that. It's a lot of weight loss quickly. When you're that big, you can lose a lot pretty fast. It will slow down. I've talked to my doctor. Everything's good. There's nothing wrong. It's just when you're real big, you can lose a lot pretty quick by doing basically anything. And one of the things I did was I completed a 5K. I will not say I ran a 5K. I completed a 5K. One of the biggest reality checks for me was completing the 5K. But coming in the bottom, I think there was only maybe a dozen or 2 dozen people behind me. And there were many ahead of me. I was almost at the end of, I was almost last. I came in pretty far back. And for someone who was a college athlete, if you're American, I had 9 letters in college or in high school. I played soccer and ran track and played football. I was a very athletic human being. And even up to just 4 or 5 years ago, I was still playing soccer and volleyball and doing stuff pretty actively. It is a big reality check. And my time, I think I could half it next year, is how bad it was. So that's a goal for then. If you are trying to lose weight or just trying to be a little more healthy, check out my Discord. It's in that link in the description of the show. There is a link to the Discord. And in there we talk about Mass Effect, The Division, games in general. But there's also a weight loss room in there. So if you want to get in there and talk about that stuff, share recipes, just kind of talk about your situation, just to tell someone about it, we're all ears in there. It's a cool little Discord channel with less than 100 people in it, a couple dozen who kind of participate here and there, and then a solid like handful or maybe up to a dozen people who are on there quite often. So this is my formal invitation to that if you want to get in there for any of those reasons. Let's get into the actual news. We're going to start off with Xbox. We found out from Avowed, from some interviews that are going on, that game from Obsidian will be roughly the length of the Outer Worlds. That sounds about right. You're going to have some people say that that's too short, that's not enough. That's fine. Outer Worlds ended up having some really good DLC as well, and that may be a thing for Avowed. But the Outer Worlds was one of those things where it was like just long enough, in my opinion. The game it's relatively basic. It's definitely kind of them. You can tell they're kind of dabbling a little bit. They're not really trying to do a 200-hour epic quite yet. And it seems like it's going to be the same with Avowed. And now the Outer Worlds 2, I imagine, is going to be a little more substantial, or maybe not, as we've learned from Senua's Saga and Ninja Theory, that maybe it's okay if these studios do a thing and do that consistently. But I'm fine with this, though. I'm not super hyped about Avowed. More of the things I've seen recently about it definitely have me more hyped than I was before. But still kind of lukewarm on it. I'm not a big high fantasy guy in general. Baldur's Gate 3 definitely kind of turned me a little bit, but then when I've tried some other games, like oh, heaven forbid I say this, but like when I tried to go back and play Skyrim and couldn't get into it at all because I'm a psycho. I have no interest in Elden Ring. It's not my genre or my aesthetic that I really prefer. So Avowed is gonna probably have to win me over. That said, Obsidian basically doesn't miss. I've enjoyed everything they've done. Even Grounded, which I haven't played a ton of, because it's just not I just don't like those kind of games. But I still thought it was cool. I thought it was interesting. So we'll see what happens here. And Brandon Keener, famously Garrus from Mass Effect, or the SHD AI voice in The Division, is voicing one of the main characters or NPCs in Avowed. So if you're a Keener lover, not in the Division way, then that may be of interest to you. Unfortunately, you won't be able to bang him. One of the things that has come up recently is how the Outer Worlds doesn't have romances in their game, which to some people is great. Not everyone's into that. Doesn't want to bang everyone in the games they're playing. I personally enjoy that part of games just for reasons I don't know. Maybe it's something deep seated and personal, but we won't get into that right now. Apparently, in an interview, they talked about how they considered doing romances, and it sounded like they were actually into it, but that they wanted to do something really unique and immersive, and something that not just kind of the bog standard, interact with the NPC enough or take them with you enough, and then they slowly fall in love with you, and then you have a banging scene or something. It sounds like they wanted to do more than that, but that wasn't really in the scope of what they were doing. So it seems like that wasn't a thing. If you played the Outer Worlds, you'll know that there weren't romances in that either. One of your companions could find love, or at least start some love. Who was actually my favorite character in the game to interact with. Parvati, I believe. But that was it. So, you know, knowing it's not in there makes it easier to not care about it. But man, I wish it would have been. In other Xbox news, we had Forza Horizon 4 is going to get delisted from digital platforms in December of 2024. But good guy Xbox, if you see it this way, did start sending out codes for the game that you can download for people who had it and played it on Game Pass and bought DLC but don't actually own the game. So if you played Forza Horizon 4 via, that was the one in Mexico, I believe, which was super cool. It was really pretty. I believe, right? I don't know. I'd have to look at it again. If you played it through Game Pass and never bought the game, but bought the DLC, I think they had like a Hot Wheels DLC and others, you get to download the game. They're going to send you a code for the base game. I believe the main issue, though, is that if you ever delete the game or get like a new Xbox and don't transfer it, it's gone. You won't be able to download it again. In theory, you could buy a disc at GameStop or on eBay or whatever your local marketplace of choice would be. But digital versions will be a no-go after December. So good on them to take care of the people who spent money to try to ensure that they have some way to continue playing those games, but the delisting in general sucks. The reasoning for this delisting, I believe, are expiring licenses for cars and music. I assume there just isn't enough of a player base to justify continuing to pay those licenses. Which is funny because I believe the current players jumped up to like 70,000 or something after this announcement, which would make it look like it might be worth it, but that will surely drop off pretty quickly. So, rip Forza Horizon 4. I bet Horizon 6 is coming out sooner than later. We also got news and some reveals about a patent that came out, or that was made public, about the Xbox Keystone. If you don't remember what the Xbox Keystone is it was a streaming box for Xbox, and it was like like a Roku stick or like an Amazon Fire or whatever they're called. This was so sure to come out, at least to me, that during COVID times, when Phil Spencer was doing interviews and appearances, in his background on his shelves, it was always, people were always paying attention because he was, people thought that he was like teasing things, and he did at times. I believe he even teased the Series S before it was even announced. I think it was someone spotted that in one of his earlier interviews. It was like just sitting there and no one noticed it. This Keystone was there. It was pretty prominently shown too, and I think he even acknowledged it at some point. But this never came to pass. Since then, we've seen that they're partnering with a lot of other streaming services. I believe just in this last couple of weeks, the Amazon Fire Sticks are going to have a way to play Xbox Game Pass through their service. I think those have a Bluetooth connection, so you can hook up an Xbox controller to your Fire Stick and play Xbox games if you log into your Game Pass, which is pretty cool. And if you have the right hardware and the right internet and stuff, their service is extremely good. It's very good. And I believe this year they're expecting to have game streaming for your entire library. Currently, it's only Game Pass games that you can stream. But I believe this year they're expecting that if you own other games that aren't on Game Pass, but you own them, you'll be able to stream them, which is going to be a big deal. That's really cool. The reasoning behind Keystone not coming out, from various articles I've read, has basically just come down to they couldn't make it cheap enough. This is a thing where, I mean, if you charge more than 50 or maybe $100 for this, it's going to be a no-go for people. You might as well spend a little bit more and just get a Series S, right? Especially if you're not going to buy a console at all and you want to do this completely digitally or streaming. If you have to pay $100 for the stick or this box, and then pay 70 for a controller or whatever the controller is, then you're not that far off from just buying a darn system. So it seems like this just wasn't in the works. This is also a really big example of when we've been seeing people flipping out about, I think it's this Project Latitude or the directive or something at Microsoft, where they're considering putting essentially, potentially every game that's in their first party library on multi-platform, either at launch or eventually. This is why people shouldn't freak out so much about that. They got to the point where they had prototyped and I assume had maybe a production ready box with this Keystone, to the point where it was showing up in the background of Phil's streams, and then they cut it. They dabbled, they checked it out, they figured out the metrics, and it didn't work out. And with the multi-platform strategy with Xbox, we've already seen that multiplayer games, and Grounded to a point, but especially Sea of Thieves, have been wildly successful in their multi-platform push, where games like Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment, albeit those being lower tier kind of AA games, didn't do well at all on multi-platform, specifically on PlayStation. So don't be surprised if, they'll probably still attempt more single player games and multiplayer games, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the long run we see them mostly stick with multiplayer games in this multi-platform strategy, because those are kind of the games that demand that more, and they're also the ones that probably hurt your own bottom line the least, because, maybe a lot of those people probably weren't going to buy your box anyways. And that's not really Xbox's goal, as we've learned. So, yeah, the Project Keystone, very interesting, interesting story there, and that combined with us not getting like mid-gen refreshes of the consoles, to me, still for Xbox indicates that we're getting, their next console probably sooner than later, and I wouldn't be surprised if they try to beat the PlayStation 6 by a couple years, if not at least a year. So we'll see. Speaking of PlayStation, they have confirmed that PlayStation Stars is returning, quote unquote, soon. This was kind of a interesting saga that's been going on. Correct me if I'm wrong, PlayStation fans, but I believe this is like a rewards program. I swore that it got announced at one point that this got canceled, but apparently I was wrong. And it's been out for weeks at this point. I believe it potentially over a month. And there's not really been much communication about it. And then they finally did kind of say, like, yeah, we're going to be rolling it back out soon. This is strange. PlayStation's so interesting because, you see Xbox out there trying to interact, doing PR, showing off their services and their hardware and their games and all this. And they just get drugged for not communicating the right way or to the right people or not having the right games or whatever. Then you have PlayStation that just doesn't communicate at all. And it doesn't matter because they have the install base, they have the juice, they have the games, or at least, that's how it's portrayed. Despite the fact that they're in the middle of what is essentially a giant drought right now, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And that must be such a comfortable position for them. But I do wonder if they've considered kind of the long run, because that won't last forever unless they tend to it. So, but good for them. Their lack of communication is probably a strength much of the time. We also found out that a Horizon Netflix project has been canceled. I believe this was going to be like a mini series showing off the Horizon universe. And I don't know if we ever got details about whether it was going to portray Aloy or other known characters in the series, but it's not going to portray anything now. Supposedly this is partially due to some accusations against the showrunner, who is pretty well known for some other shows also. There's also a lot of conversation about how a show like Horizon was going to require so much CG that unless it had a hilariously gigantic budget, which it might not be able to get return on anyways, it was either going to be too small scoped or wasn't going to look very good. And when you have, other shows like Fallout and The Last of Us and stuff doing these things pretty well recently, I suspect that, to a point, they don't want to be the first ones to screw it up. We don't want another Assassin's Creed incident. It's probably for the best. It's a bummer. It would have been an interesting world to see portrayed in live action, but it's not happening, at least for now. We also found out that Sony is returning to the Tokyo Game Show. This is a pretty big deal. They've pretty much abandoned most trade shows and things like that to do their own thing. And it's especially notable because I believe, at least as of the recording of this, that neither Xbox or Nintendo are going to be at the Tokyo Game Show, which is a pretty big show from what I remember. And there's been times where it's been a place for fairly big announcements. So where we typically see Xbox especially, but even Nintendo at a lot of shows, and never see PlayStation, to see the roles reversed is interesting. And I'm curious if this is like a big change in strategy that we're going to see happen more often now that we have some kind of new leadership in place at PlayStation, or if this is just a one-off and maybe this is where they reveal like the PS5 Pro or something like that. We'll have to wait and see. And for Nintendo, we got word from the president of Nintendo saying that they are going to prevent scalping of their system by making enough hardware for demand. What's funny is that if that happens, and probably I alone, will be concerned about the hardware they're making. Because there's been rumors for years that they set the hardware spec for the next Nintendo console at this point, like 3 years ago, if not more. And that would be interesting. And because, one way that this could be true is if for the last 2 years plus, they've just been stocking up systems. They've just been making them and stocking them up. And they're going to have like 70 million consoles ready to sell day one. Or 50 plus maybe, if that's true, I'm a little concerned that the hardware is going to be pretty out of date. Not that Nintendo fans care. I mean, you look at the Switch; it's still selling like hotcakes, and it was outdated 7-8 years ago when it released, let alone now, and it's still, no one cares. It runs games like crap, especially their first party games. The games don't look very good, at least not from a like pixel point of view. I understand aesthetics and design is different, and that does tend to be very good in their consoles and their games. I think this is bullcrap. I think no matter how many they've made, you're still always going to have those people who are going to buy out entire stocks. And even if they are easier to find, and like if you remember the PS5 and Xbox Series X especially, how they, after their first run, it was like impossible to find either, especially the PlayStation. It's still going to be probably easier to get that Craigslist ad or that Facebook Marketplace ad or whatever, eBay or whatever you use, and just go get it. Even if you have to pay a couple hundred, bucks more, even if there's enough. It's just the way it works. So we'll see what comes of this. That next console is just such an interesting subject to talk about. I plan on buying one, even if I'm like underwhelmed by it. I haven't had a Nintendo console in many, many years. I believe my Game Boy Color. I believe that was the last one I owned. So we'll, see. I've missed out on a lot. I just wish their backwards compatibility systems were more robust, where, I could go back and play, multiple generations of games and not worry about how easy that's going to be. But we'll wait and see. Maybe they're going to do some cool stuff. Moving into non-major platform news, we had Ubisoft confirm that Beyond Good and Evil 2 is still in development. This is a game that I believe got initially teased or revealed with a trailer in like 2013 or something. And then they did another like re-reveal in 2018 when I was at E3 and I was in the Ubisoft Forward, show. I was watching it live, and they had Joseph Gordon-Levitt come out and show off this what in hindsight was kind of like a creator ripoff app. But they had this whole thing where it was like you can make music for the game and art for the game and do all this stuff and collaborate with our devs and I think they even showed some footage of the game back then. And I remember we did like a private interview, and I could break NDA by talking about it, but frankly, I don't remember anything from the question and answer. I just remember where we talked about Beyond Good and Evil 2, and that was in 2018. And now we're in 2024, and I bet we're still 2 years away from that game. Maybe next year, but we'll see. But it's still coming. And apparently they added a mission to the remaster of the first game that just came out to link the game. So there you go, Beyond Good and Evil fans. You're getting your day in court. Amazon Games chief states that the Tomb Raider and Lord of the Rings MMO will be revealed shortly. I believe the exact quote was something along the lines of, not tomorrow, but very soon. So I'm really excited about this Tomb Raider reboot or whatever they're going to do. I believe it's going to continue off of that last reboot trilogy, and it's going to be a continuation of that story, which I know some people are lukewarm, especially on the third game. I loved it. I thought it was great. I didn't love everything about it, but overall, I enjoy that trilogy in general. I really like what they've done with the Tomb Raider character with Lara Croft, and I'm really curious to see what like a 2025 version of that game looks like, especially as they continue that specific kind of saga. We also got an interesting quote from Konami, Konami's Metal Gear Solid series producer. I imagine this is the person who's the series, kind of the head of this Metal Gear Solid Delta or Metal Gear Solid 3 remake that they're doing. And he said very specifically that it's a dream and like a goal of his to get Kojima re-involved in the series. I think that is going to be very tough. Konami really, as they say, screwed the pooch. I really don't understand that saying. And every time I say it or think it, I realize how disgusting it is. And I don't really know what it's trying to portray. But anyways, man, I would love to see it. Those games are such a fever dream in general. And there's something about his involvement that makes that okay. This Delta remake looks great. Like it looks like they're doing a really good job with it. Just Konami without Kojima's involvement. But man, if they try to add another game to the series that's like original and he's not involved, it's just gonna be tough, man. Like he just brings the juice. Like I think his like Artur status is kind of like overblown and I think kind of pretentious at this point. Personally, I think he's a genius, and I think he's deserved all of the clout he's gotten around the gaming industry. But it's definitely kind of like a smell your own fart situation to a point that even I get kind of eye rolly about sometimes. But there's a reason I'm recording the podcast for a couple dozen people, and he's one of the most celebrated and well-known game creators to ever exist. So I try to be humble about such opinions. So I would love to see him getting back involved with Metal Gear Solid. I do not think that is very likely. We had George R.R. Martin teasing that there could be Elden Ring film or series adaptations. That would be very interesting because the From Software games are so interesting. If you're a Vati Vidya listener, which I am, even though I will never play any of these games, none of the From Software games interest me at all. Elden Ring, nothing. But Vati's videos are so good. And there is so much like lore and stuff to discover in all of their games, but especially Elden Ring, that I watch them like crazy. I watch every one that comes out. even though I've never played and I will probably never play the game. That said, this is another kind of smelling your own farts thing a little bit to me, where it's like, it would be so, because the lore seems so interdependent. It's so, weaved into itself that, man, I don't even know where you start with a movie or a series. I get, Fallout's similar, and that show ended up being really, really good because they didn't make it too big. They kind of told us a relatively small story in a fairly condensed time frame. So that's how you kind of have to do this stuff. But man, I would be very curious for a series. Now, for a movie, a good example would be, was it the Dungeons and Dragons movie that had Chris Pine in it? That I don't even care about Dungeons and Dragons. I obviously had some interest in that movie or knowledge from playing lots of Baldur's Gate 3. So that definitely helped. But in general, it's still not really my thing. But man, that movie did such a good job of giving you a general idea of the world you're in, giving you some very specific need to know info about everyone involved and what's going on, and then just having a fun, good movie in there. And so that's probably a good example from a movie standpoint. So let's see what happens with the old Elden Ring film series adaptation. The final thing is, and I'm not really going to talk much about it, before I left, the whole Dr. Disrespect thing happened. I've personally always thought this guy was kind of a douchebag. There was a time where I was a fan of Dr. Disrespect, like before the bathroom incidents, that was the E3 or whatever, before the cheating thing with his wife and all of that stuff. I dipped out long before then, but there was a time where the character was entertaining to me, right? But for me, it's just one of those things where, especially in kind of the modern day, is it almost feels like the people who are the most like vocal about certain things almost always seem to be the ones with things to hide, at least in my in my experience. So he sucks. Hopefully it's over. Unfortunately, he'll come back on Kick or something and turn into a big like anti-woke, anti-cancel culture, whatever advocate, just like all the other creeps do. And my advice is to don't support people like him and support people like me instead, because I'm pretty sure nothing like that will ever happen for me. Cue the video no one would ever make, 10 years from now, and I don't know, hopefully nothing. I don't know. I think I'm okay. And that's a super weird way to end this episode, but that's how I am going to wrap this up. And thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please consider supporting all of my content, including listening, watching, sharing, following all my socials, or throwing a few bucks my way via the link in the description of the show. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So, until next time.